It was a 2-day retreat. We arrived on Tuesday evening, and we had 2 full days of meetings, then flew back late on Thursday night to DC.
Certainly, I found it a very beneficial and fascinating trip.
New Orleans brought back to my memory other 2 regions in Latin America, El Beni in Bolivia and La Mojana in Colombia. And I thought, what is the real difference between these cities?
Today we saw the pumping station, the West Closure pumping station, which is one of the biggest in the world, I understand. And then we saw some of the really big surge barriers that were built post-Katrina.
It was really interesting for me to see where New Orleans was, 6 months following Katrina and really where they are now. And I was really surprised and happy to see a lot of the improvements that were made.
And I found the retreat in New Orleans very interesting and challenging because it allowed us to learn a little bit about how big mitigation works are helping or not the cities to avoid risk or to control risk.
And so this was another opportunity to sort of be in New Orleans, meet people doing similar kinds of work, and form partnerships that I hope sustain through to our work in Latin America and the Caribbean.
For many of us it was a very enlightening study tour, I would say, rather than a retreat. First because for many of us we could relate to post-disaster reconstruction situation or processes we have found in the client countries or the client cities we work in. A lot of similarities and I think beyond, of course, the impact of Katrina, what we saw was really a story of opportunities.
And also for team building, I thought it was a very nice experience.
These 3 regions have achieved a long-term solution. However, New Orleans seems to have additional elements that the others know.
In retrospect, very obvious. The Army Corps of Engineers were very well aware of the risks, but they were unable to translate that risk into public policy so that they would get the funding and the mandate to improve the flood control defenses. So for me, that's a key issue. When technical people understand the risk, how do they translate it into actual public policy changes and the funding necessary to make improvements?
If I can pinpoint one of the specific things that I think was really particularly useful for the programs I'm working on. It seems New Orleans had a big problem with vacant houses after Katrina. There was whole areas of the city where, I won't say half, but part of the stock of the housing stock was vacant and hence vandalized or just wasn't properly maintained. And what we learned they did in New Orleans is they started this program where they either bought to a lower price those properties, vacant properties or vandalized properties, and then they sold them back to the neighbors, either as properties that they could refurbish if that's what they wanted, or to use the plots for an extra space or a community garden or anything, but the idea was that they were the ones who will be responsible for the upkeep of these spaces.
Very enriching to meet people at Tulane University and to see how beyond the impact that Katrina had on the university, how it really reshaped and helped the university refocus on one hand on New Orleans.
So one of the things that really struck me in what we heard was the importance of the cultural and the physical development from a historical point of view of the city and how that was playing into the strategy, the development planning for the regeneration activities and for the redevelopment activities. There was often comments about the reliance on each other rather than on the government. So I think in that sense, the cultural aspects of resilience, the cultural aspects of social cohesion were very important.
Yeah, I thought that the way it was done in New Orleans, it lacked an overarching planning structure. And I think it's important to remember in our projects that this overarching planning is crucial to make sense of different planning processes that might be bottom-up and that are very desirable, but that require an overarching planning process.
A lot of the damages actually was in this area that could be considered a buffer zone, and I think it was interesting going back to see that was one of the lessons learned, and now much more detailed flood mapping is being done, and there's a much better understanding of the topography and the dimensions of risk as it relates to that topography. And I think that's something that we can learn a lot from, particularly working in the Caribbean, because one of the biggest challenges that we have is basically how to build and where to build. That's the problem that we're trying to solve. And as a result of that, locational specific physical planning policies have been put in place and enforcement mechanisms to match those policies.
I think it's a very encouraging message for the team and all the people working in Haiti, because we are 8 years after Katrina and we can see that they're still reconstructing. We have the exact same issues of coordinating, one group of people thinking this way, the other one that way, and trying to put everything together.
There are major large-scale work that needs to be completed, like we saw at the pumping station. That coordination across many different agencies or bodies is absolutely central. And if we, as a bank, need to take on those types of very large-scale projects, that donor coordination is something that perhaps we need to be looking at with a more open mind in order to get these things done.
New Orleans retreat was super useful for me because there was a really strong analogy to the work I do in Guyana. What we learned in Katrina, or in the situation in New Orleans from the Army Corps of Engineers, is very similar to what we're doing, in that they put together this model, they identified what works they are going to do, and they've executed them. We're in a stage where we're just finishing the model, so it was very interesting to be able to see what their vision of the reconstructed New Orleans would be and how they saw the infrastructure to fit into that plan.
And I think New Orleans and some examples in Japan, in Europe, are showing us that expensive mitigation works allow to protect some parts of the cities, but each time it's necessary to maintain them, to improve the levels of security, to be able to keep the protection of the people, and that becomes very expensive for the cities.
It's about financial capacity, it's about culture, it's about technical capacity. And all of these three situations don't have yet a unique solution.
That was very interesting and relates to our work in the Caribbean, is that they had actually helped facilitate locational specific building codes, right, depending on where you are in the city. And as part of that, they had mobilized building code managers that were responsible for a specific area or neighborhood.
Effective and great idea. And it is very relevant, for example, for the Mexican case, where very recently there's lots of vacant houses for different reasons than Katrina, but still the issue is the same. Lots of housing developments with a lot of empty houses that are being vandalized, and they're a problem for both the local government and also the neighbors.
New Orleans as a city will be able to exist into the mid and long term, given the problems associated with coastal erosion, which is quite significant, as well as the increased frequency and severity of storms brought about by global warming. can we expect New Orleans to be there in 100 years, even with the world's most advanced flood control defenses? I'm not sure. The jury's still out on that.
Help them rethink about their role and think about the concept of resilience. And it eventually led to also the establishment of the Disaster Resilience Leadership Academy, with whom we are currently working now in Haiti or in African countries. So that, I think, was a very nice experience.
We're in a stage where we were just finishing the model, so it was very interesting to be able to see what their vision of the reconstructed New Orleans would be and how they saw the infrastructure to fit into that plan.
One of the talks we attended, the professor said, we're always fighting the last war, and I think they were preparing for the previous disaster, and not necessarily for the new one or for climate change for that matter.
So on the last mission we were in Mexico, I just brought up this issue, and I said, well, I just came back from New Orleans, and it seems like there's this idea where they just got the properties back, and in the Mexican case it's even simpler because there's one big mortgage bank that basically owns most of these properties, and they sold them to the people that live there. And you'd be surprised, if the price is right, or at least what they think is right, how interested people would be in it. And it's a very simple idea. Obviously both places have gotten there for different reasons, but I think it was great to, at least for me, to learn that option, that it's pretty simple, but I hadn't thought of it, and seems to work.
My view is that the difference could be the capacity of the society, of the communities, to achieve an agreement regarding development, taking into account the natural system.
The question as to whether social capital can have the same value or greater value than economic or political capital.
That's the most difficult part of the DRM, the social, political agreements regarding development.
And the role of social capital in putting forward methodical ways to restructure or to redevelop neighborhoods block by block or even house by house.
No matter how much financial resources there is, no matter how big technical capacity there is in a society, if there is not an agreement in the development objectives, none of the measure would be efficient in terms of risk reduction.